and they could increase inequalities, global inequalities. Now let me come to TTIP. I think that's a particularly bad agreement, and let me say why. It's not about trade. Trade barriers between Europe and America, tariffs have already come down, basically very, very low. Little changes in the exchange rate do more to change competitivity than wiping out the tariffs. So the fact is that the instability in exchange rates caused by lack of harmonization of monetary policy is a far bigger impediment to trade than any of the tariffs.
But the trade costs relating to non-tariff trade barriers, I mean...
So then the question is the non-tariff barriers. Now the question then is, what are those non-tariff barriers? Those are basically regulations. Regulations are important to our citizens. They're important for health, education, the environment, even the management of the economy. We realized that we didn't have the right financial sector regulation, and that's why we had the global financial crisis. These are very contentious and difficult issues. Within the United States, we don't have harmonization of regulation. We have 50 different states that are writing all kinds of regulations. So before the United States says we ought to have international harmonization, why doesn't the United States have harmonization within the United States? Well, the part of the answer is you don't have to have harmonization in lots of different areas. The question is, where do you have to have harmonization and when don't you? When is it important? When isn't it important? And how, when you need harmonization, is the best way to go about it. So to me, this is at the heart of democracy. I don't want my trade representative to be doing harmonizing because I know whose interest he represents. He represents producer interest. So what they want is not, well, they're not really interested in harmonization, let me make it clear. If it were harmonizing the top, they would be yelling. What they want is stripping away regulation, harmonizing down. They're not saying, okay, let's harmonize standards on intellectual property to make access to generic medicines more accessible for everybody, that'll lower the price and that will improve health care. And that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about, say, this idea of exclusive data, which is a way of making drug prices higher, reducing access to generic medicine, extending that for biologics to 12 years. Even President Obama opposes that. But his trade minister, the USTR, is taking a position that is extreme, even for the United States, and insisting on that for TPP and TTIP. So that's harmonizing to a standard that is in the advantage of big pharma against American people, European people, generics, access to health. So we wouldn't have that if we had an open debate in Congress and European Parliament. They would not accept this. It's being done this way because the big pharma knows it can't get it through our Parliament, through a Congress. And it's using an in-run, in secret, to get around democratic process. The most invidious aspect of it is the investment agreement, the ISDS. Germany played a very important role in opposing this. And let me explain why that's really a very dangerous provision. And that alone is reason to reject it. The USTR has said it's important to protect property rights. You might say there might be some grain of truth that this was a trade agreement between, say, Zaire and the United States. It's not. It's a trade agreement between the United States and Germany, the United States and the EU. You have better property rights protections than the United States. You're not worried about the United States, and we shouldn't be worried about you. You even have a higher court. If your courts abuse property rights, we can appeal to a higher court, European court. So it's not about property rights. Let me make it clear. It's not about property rights. What is it about? It's about stopping Parliament, the European Parliament, the US Congress, from passing regulations that would protect our economy, our people, our health. So under this provision, Philip Morris is suing Uruguay for the loss of expected profits because Uruguay passed a regulation saying that cigarettes have to be labeled dangerous for your health, which they are. And a result of that regulation, people reduced smoking. And a result of that, Philip Morris lost profits. And now the taxpayers in Uruguay are being asked to give money, the money that Philip Morris would have made from killing the Uruguayan people. And the judicial process, except not, I couldn't call it a judicial process, this private court that they've established is so expensive that the Uruguay can't afford it. It can't afford to defend itself against Philip Morris. Fortunately, Mayor Bloomberg is coming to the rescue. He says it's unacceptable that America would have passed a law that is exposing Uruguay to death. And so he's coming to help Uruguay. This should not be the kind of legal framework. So this is an attempt to increase the power of corporations to run our economies, our societies. It's not a trade agreement.
But isn't this to some extent dangerous for developing countries? Because if, for example, if there are trade agreements between developed and developing countries that say they will not invest in that country if there is no
we have evidence on that. It's absolutely not true. Okay. And I take Brazil. Brazil, which happens to have a very informed civil society and an active, so this is the country that really understands what's going on. They have said they will never sign an agreement with an ISDS provision. And they have said they've looked at the data, no effect on their foreign investment. People come in if it's attractive. South Africa has said exactly the same. They're canceling their agreements. They say, we're open for foreign investment. We want foreign investment. This is not being attractive for foreign investment. What we want is to persuade citizens in our country that we treat them with the same respect we treat citizens of foreign countries. Because in the end, you want an environment that treats property rights right. And when you're saying you have to be a foreigner to get good property protection, you're saying it's bad for domestic investors. So let's create an environment that is the right environment for investment. Foreign or domestic.
But it's interesting because I think it's today or tomorrow that the EU Commissioner Malmström is just proposing new ideas on this kind of ISDS, and the idea is so far to have this kind of international trade court and to say, but you would not say not make it any better, just leave it aside, or not trying to make it better.
If you have it, you have to make it better. Having a private. The judicial system is one of the most important parts of the public good. And you don't privatize the judicial system. Right. I mean, that should be fundamental. Now, the question is, okay, if we have a public judicial system, that's, to me, necessary, but it's not sufficient. Because then the question is, what is the law? What is the law that the judicial system has to interpret? A law that says you have to compensate for the loss of expected profits from the passage of a regulation for protection of the public interest is a bad law. Think about this, go back 40 years. Assume you had that law in place and you discover that asbestos is dangerous. We didn't know asbestos was dangerous. We discovered asbestos was dangerous, and what happened? The asbestos manufacturers had to compensate for the damage that it did, deaths. We had to redo our buildings. What would have happened now under the new law? The government of Germany would have to pay the asbestos manufacturers for their lost profits from the regulation that says you cannot kill people. that's not the right legal framework. So yes, there is some legal framework, but already we have a legal framework against expropriation.
Professor, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.